Frigid Relations, a Powers, Masks, and Capes short story. Written by Tao Wong. Narrated by 𝗪𝒡𝒂𝒏𝒅. Local hero saves the Yukon quest. Kelly knew that was going to be the headline in the White Horse Star. The new editor was not particularly creative with their titles, preferring to go with the simple and traditional rather than innovative or creative. That was fine. It made her job easy. All she had to do was a piece on their elusive power, the local Dawson City resident who'd frozen the Yukon River. Problem was, he was a loner, one of the 500 or so residents that lived in the city over the long winter. Not that it was getting that cold these days, which was the entire point of the article, and her subsequent $50 job. $75 if she took the photo herself, which she intended to do. Every dollar counted, though maybe she could ask for hardship pay, having to snowshoe all the way to his cabin. At least it was warmish today, only -15°C, excluding wind chill. With only a mild breeze, walking along the frozen river was chilly but not life-threatening. Peaceful, even, with the pristine and bright white of a recent snowfall which deadened the quiet winter afternoon. Each breath she took froze the inside of her nostrils, that indescribable smell of fresh snow and frozen sap all around. Even better, she caught her prey as he was coming down the river, stomping along without a care in the world and a simple gray plaid North Face jacket. "Thomas Nagano?" she called out. When he didn't twitch, she tried again. "You're Thomas Nagano, right? The power that froze the river?" Nearer now, she could see more details about his face. No toque or hat, which showcased the close-cropped black hair, clean-shaven unlike 3/4 of the population in Dawson this time of year. His eyes were hidden by the only nod to winter, a pair of wraparound sunglasses.
"No need to shout. I heard you the first time. I am. Your freezer give out? You should just put it outside. It's cold enough. Be fine for the next while."
No. I left a message for you. I'm the reporter." Kelly still felt a flush of pride saying it. Sure, she was an amateur. That was all the star could afford, after all. But she was still one. Finally. "For the interview?"
"I told them I didn't want to do it."
"The interview?"
"That too."
Thomas came to a stop, arms crossed in front of him. She was surprised to note there was no puff of moisture as he spoke, as though he was too cold for the air to react. She didn't respond, though. Knew better not to. Most powers didn't like it, and they were common enough that even her small classroom of a dozen kids had one when she was growing up. Of course, Neil's ability to take colors, temporarily, from things was nowhere as useful or powerful as Thomas's. In fact, considering what he had done, there was no reason he wasn't an actual cape. Or worst, a mask. A mask hiding out in the wilds. That thought thrilled her, at the expose she might unleash. Foolish. If he was a mask, he would never have agreed to freeze the river in the first place.
"You want to sit down?"
He jerked his head backwards, to the cabin she could see just behind a stand of trees on the riverbank. The edges of the cabin, at least.
"A touch warmer in there than here. Less wind, at least."
"Yeah, sure. Yes." She smiled, bobbed ahead, followed as he led her over to his log cabin in the woods, a small smile on her face still from her non-existent expose. He dropped the battered blue metal camp cup on the table, still steaming from the hot tea. He finished pouring tea into his own cup beside hers, placed the glass teapot down, and then proceeded to lean against the side of the wall, watching her. She thanked him absently, looking around the cramped single-room log cabin, with its old wood heater and stove combo, the place filled with that wondrous smell of burnt wood and slow-cooking stew. "You've lived here for a while?" she surmised, eyeing the plethora of knickknacks covering every inch of available horizontal space.
"A few years. Not that long."
Glanced around, smiled slightly.
"It's not as much as you think. There's just not a lot of space."
And you're not from here, right? She said.
No, Ontario originally, Kingston. Though I spent a few years in Toronto itself before.
He trailed off. Before?
The power. It comes to us differently. Different times, space, events.
She nodded. They said everyone had a latent ability, but not everyone managed to activate it, though the numbers had risen recently. No one knew why, even if there were quite a few hypotheses. Changes in the environment, a tipping point in genetic material, maybe a virus released by a brain making changes. It didn't matter, not for most people.
Mine happened when I was taking a shower.
A shower?
Yeah.
He looked uncomfortable, shrugged.
Water was too cold, so I made it hotter.
Hotter? She said, realized she was acting like a parrot, shook her head, apologized.
It's fine. Yeah. My power, it's not anything amazing. Not a real cape power. It's slow, you know? But I can make myself, the things I touch change temperature.
He shrugged.
Slowly.
So the river?
Took a lot of work, but it's all one thing, once you start with a spot of ice. Then you expand it, you see? Just keep adding, a little at a time. Takes a long time, but I just need a spot and some help from, well, up there. Once it gets deep enough, it's pretty insulated. The water's all really cold already, you know?
Thomas said. She did. Glacier-fed waters made the Yukon River a brilliant blue-green. What happens to the heat?
Ah.
He tapped his own cup with his finger, the steam billowing upwards.
I contain it in me. Some of it. Release some. The rest?
He shrugged.
That's for the scientists to figure out. Not that they cared that much when I showed it off. Said it was similar to others and then sent me on my way.
Grinned suddenly.
Paid me $250, though.
And you came to live in Dawson City because...
Work. The call of the wild.
Thomas smiled then, looking out of one of the smaller windows, looking wistful. Outside, the trees waved and bowed and little swirls of snow drifted.
Not much to it. I take the heat, store it within me. Come spring and summer, the mining companies, they hire me to help warm up their sites. Allows them to start mining faster, you know?
She did, for she'd been born and bred up here. The gold mining companies stripped the earth, dug in deep and ran the broken ground through their filters. It made for a lot of earth being moved, and if the ground was still frozen, made it impossible. Someone who could move up their timetable was a godsend since the number of months they could work was still seriously curtailed, climate change or not. How did they know to contact you? Why?
When I'm not working, I'm always storing heat.
Thomas shrugged.
I do that for the town. Heat up the freezers, even have a small side business. If it wasn't underneath the snow, you'd see my metal blocks. I'd chill them, rent them out during the summer so that houses can stay a little cooler.
That works? She said, surprised.
A little. Not enough, really, except if the room's small. But there's a few places I swing by, like Diamond Tooth's Gertie,
he said.
They don't mind me sitting around, watching and keeping the place cool. Pay me a little, too. It covers the bills when the miners don't need me no more.
She frowned. There were a dozen things he could do with his ability. More. As though he could see the questions and answers in her eyes, he spoke.
I don't need more. Just enough to cover the bills. Save a little. Maybe go on a trip once in a while.
A gesture around the simple house.
I'm comfortable, and I sure don't want to be a cape, you know? It's dangerous.
Of course. She sipped at her tea, mulling his answers. It had cooled quite fast. The room they were within, not that much warmer than outside. Enough, at least, that she wasn't wearing her hat. So, the quest?
Right. Well, as I said, I'm known. When the river wasn't freezing again, they came to me. Told me that if they couldn't get it to run again this year, the government was going to pull their funding. Something about regulations.
He picked up his own cup, drank it all, and then poured more tea in from the teapot. frowned as he realized it was running empty and turned sideways, reaching backwards to place a hand against the metal kettle on the stove.
They said, well, they asked if I was okay trying it.
And that was it? You said yes, and it just began freezing the river?
Pretty much. We had to cut our way a bit further up from the city, of course. Started freezing a patch of ground, let it spread, and keep it going, following the ice and the banks. Had to sleep outside just to make sure it stuck.
Sounds uncomfortable, she said sympathetically.
Wasn't the worst?
Wasn't the best either, she filled in for him. She was beginning to get a feel for this quiet man. So, if they had you, why the late announcement?
Oh, that.
He paused, removed his hand from the steaming kettle, and refilled the teapot. The tea bag slipped within, bobbing up and down as dark tea mixed with new water. Kelly blinked, then raised her cup to cover her surprise.
Well, it wasn't working that well at first. It kept getting too warm, you know?
Memories of the early part of the winter, so warm that the kids were walking around in a single layer, rose. She nodded, before he continued.
I was getting pretty tired of sleeping outdoors in tents, not having much luck getting the ice thick enough. Then there was that cold snap.
He snapped his fingers in turn, startling her.
Suddenly, it got a lot easier. The river started crystallizing, just like that. Made it easier to keep deepening it all, even if the water still ran.
That's really cool. And all that heat, you store it?
Yeah.
How much can you store? She asked curiously. Thomas only answered with a shrug. It was enough for now. After that, she just needed some other details. His full name, a photo. Filing the article would take her the rest of the day if she worked late. She figured she would. After all, it was her first real job. The trio of scientists stood around the readouts, still in their hazmat suits. They traded subtle glances, none willing to speak first and state the obvious. How long they would have stood there, no one knew. For Paragon, it did not matter. They did not matter, as he read the dials and the printout. A voice, the smartest of them, confirmed his thoughts.
Linear growth, not exponential. But it does not seem to be stopping, does it?
The Paragon said. No. The erstwhile leader straightened, offered the Paragon a nod.
And all of you've tried hasn't stopped it?
No. We had some others come by, Powers and Capes. We can slow it down, and we've got them working in shifts to hold the temperature steady. But they're all getting exhausted. It just keeps going. She shuffled her feet, embarrassed. We don't know when it'll end. If it will. We need to run more tests. We need more time. But if it keeps increasing...
Yes.
The Paragon sighed, looking away from the monitor and the scientists to the remnants of the lab. The problem with Powers and their random abilities, and the scientists who felt the need to research such things, was sometimes accidents happened. Like a portal to another world, an alien piece of technology they could not turn off. Sometimes accidents happened. Only then did they cry for help.
I'll make a call. We'll find something.
Thomas never expected to meet a real Cape. Strange, how a small article in the paper would result in his life being interrupted. It probably wouldn't have happened if she hadn't included the line about his infinite potential. Now, here he was, staring at a pulsing red organic and tech construct, asked to touch the object and keep the rising heat level. For how long, they couldn't say, nor whether touching it would mutate him or give him cancer or some alien virus. All they could promise was that he would be compensated well for his time, be made as comfortable as possible while he was here, and that he would receive care from the best-powered healer possible, if necessary. Well and good. But what had swayed Thomas at the end was the final promise. They would not, in any circumstance, let the press know about his involvement. Once bitten, twice shy after all. Who knew what other troubles would arrive if he repeated his past mistakes?
Any time, Mr. Nagano.
Paragon sounded patient, but then again he always did. Man could take an ICBM to the face and still patiently ask you to stop wasting ammunition. That meme still circulated, though less frequently these days. We had to use every other cape to lower the temperature to what it is now. So, if you could...
Yeah.
Thomas raised his hand, pushed it forward. Felt nothing beyond a slight sponginess. Then, reaching inwards, he began to pull on the heat. Kept tugging it in, storing it away in that space within him that wasn't really inside. Hurt his head to even think about it, really. "It's working!" The voice was excited, loud and female. It annoyed him.
Told you.
Thomas looked around, pulled the chair that closer with his foot, and sat down. Feet stuck out, head leaned back, getting comfortable. He had no idea how long he'd be here. Maybe he could ask for a footstool and a TV. Troublesome, all this. Which was he never wanted to get involved. Too much damn trouble. "Will he be fine?" Kelly said, shifting on her feet. She could see him in the distance behind the protective glass. Relegated to the press area, the only person here. Her prize for breaking the story, for being around when it happened, for having her first story pulled and disappeared. Of course, she couldn't write about Thomas again. That had been explained to her. But the resolution of this story, the aversion of a potential catastrophe, so long as she kept his name and involvement out, it was hers. Her first big break as a reporter, and all thanks to a single interview. Maybe she'd buy him dinner when he got out. The end. This has been Frigid Relations, a Powers, Masks and Capes short story, written by Tao Wong, narrated by 𝗪𝒃𝒃. Copyright 2024, Tao Wong. Production copyright 2024, Starlit Publishing.